our third presentation, we will have chance to hear more about best practices on managing your digital forensics and evidence. Mr. Erik Ullstrand, Senior Principal Technologist from Dell Technologies, will give us more about key challenges facing digital forensics and evidence management, key outcomes and best practices on minimizing IT intervention. Mr. Erik, welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can share my screen. Hopefully that will work. I take it you can see it.
Yes, we can see. We can
Brilliant.
hear you. Everything's fine.
Excellent. Perfect. Thanks for that confirmation. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to present to you today. My name is Erik Ullstrand. I'm a pre-sales engineer for Dell Technologies in a safety and security team. My base is out of London. I look after the EMEA market, so all over Europe with a lot of different type of customers and different environments that we work in. Today we will speak a little bit about digital forensics and evidence management, some of the challenges and trends that we see in the market, and I hope to share with you during the next 25 minutes, and I will leave a little bit of space at the end of the call for taking any questions if there are any. So I want to talk a little bit about the trends that we're seeing in this market. We try to understand the challenges that are facing law enforcement, military, and intelligence agencies, and that happens worldwide. Again, the regions that we work in are across EMEA, so we see a lot of different legislations, we see a lot of different processes and traditions in this market. And today's presentation, we're going to try to explain some of those key trends, some of those challenges, and discuss on how an end-to-end infrastructure and workflow considerations can help and reduce some of those inefficiencies in the workflows. So let's start by defining a little bit some of the concepts. We often speak about digital data, evidence, and forensics as very loose terms. We try to make a distinction, and we look at digital evidence as the actual data that might be relied upon court or in a technical process to maintain, custody. And that's the extraction of devices from hard drives, from smartphones and IoT sensors and geolocations systems and so on and so forth. When we look at digital forensics, we're looking for the actual process of identifying, preserving, and documenting digital evidence for the use in criminal investigations or in technical investigations for example, private companies and elsewhere. So, what do we have? Well, we got the digital source data, which is the data that we extract from the devices, and that source data must remain intact to preserve the chain of custody, both in the forms of the data that must adhere to the quality assurances that are required from the process, and also the audit trails must be ensured. Then we have the digital analysis data, which is the data resulting from that forensic analysis. So what do we see? Well, we got multiple issues. The increase of data volumes that law enforcement and agencies are working with has exploded, right? It's the availability of storage technology, consumer devices, cloud storage services, all those have increased the number of devices that are seized per case. So that means that the law enforcement agencies around the world are facing the same challenge, right? Or a similar one, at least. The digital evidence is a key component of every investigation. It's everywhere. We have over 90% of digital components in all crime, meaning that every last case you have will almost always have smartphone in it, tablet, a device, a Windows computer, and so on and so forth. So the need for technology to combat the output of technology is clear, and so is the need for IT expertise, which is also a challenge in a lot of these environments. And the fact that you're a good and seasoned digital forensics investigator does not necessarily mean or should mean that you should be an IT expert, but so often these go hand in hand. So we need more effective tools. We need more simplified ways of addressing these challenges and problems. So let's define a little bit the management life cycle of digital forensics and evidence management. So on the left-hand side of this slide, I think we outline quite well the need for, shall we say, traditional evidence. So things like recordings from interviews. We're looking at physical evidence, of course, pictures of physical evidence, digital pictures of physical evidence, video recordings of physical evidence, sometimes lawful interception, and so on and so forth. Those generate a huge amount of data in their own right. And then we have, and then this is perhaps where this section of the market is going towards more real-time situational data. I want to clarify that there is a huge difference between the general, shall we say, post-event processing of data and the slow adaptation and sometimes exceptional capability of having a more real-time and situational ability to analyze and perhaps even instantly analyze and take action on that data. That's perhaps more prevalent in a CCTV environment, perhaps when you can see something happening and you're able to interact and then perhaps even make quick decisions on the process and the happenings at that moment. But we'll focus a little bit more on perhaps the physical evidence and the understanding that we will be in a position to extract the data, seize it, collect it, and then run it through a full chain of custody with a case management process. And that case management process, I want to draw your attention to the fact that with the digital component of the cases that we see, the data volumes are massive, and they are massive even from the beginning. You see a little curve at the bottom of this slide where we're showing how this data gets treated and how it expands in volume over time of a case. So incredibly enough, even at the start of a case, when you start gathering and collecting data, those numbers in their own right are expanding and increasing substantially. So when you start with a big number and you then start doubling and copying it and making other copies of that to process it in the various tools and the various departments that will handle those copies of data, those volumes can grow quite substantially. So if you make the idea many years ago when you started with this, perhaps a floppy drive, a CD-ROM might be all you had as your starting point, and you made a few copies of that, and it was already a challenge in those systems. Today, when you're seizing perhaps 5, 10, 20, 50 terabytes of a single device, and then suddenly you realize I have 100 of those, and those hundreds are going to be copied in multiple instances and multiple versions, you're going to end up with petabytes very quickly. And the ability to handle, process, organize, ingest, review, and report on those petabytes is a challenge for any large IT organization, let alone for police and law enforcement offices. So that's the nature of some of the challenges, and that's just the technical part, the hard data part of it. So that we believe helps and lends itself to require an end-to-end infrastructure, not just the infrastructure, but the workflow approach to it itself. Now, sometimes that is challenged by law aspects. You're sometimes limited in how you can keep the data, where you can keep the data, who you can share the data with, and how you can combine those workflows under, shall we say, single or streamlined platforms that can handle and share that workload. But the ability is there, and it's coming more and more. So what do we do? Well, we're looking at the ability to handle the workflow as a incident. First responders come. They have the responsibility of protecting any and all evidence that might be useful in a civil case or criminal case. Specific responsibilities are normally to protect the scene, to preserve and collect the evidence and submit it for further analysis. And then you're looking at the actual point of data collection. So this is the way that you process the scene. You make sure to maintain the audit trail of it. You have to be careful not to interfere with the data that you're collecting and not changing it and not limiting it. compressing it in ways that are destructive, and so on and so forth. And then we're looking for the ability to actually analyze the data. So this stage is where you have a systematic indexing and search of the evidence related to the incident itself. This is where the data objects are found and collected in the collected information. So where you extract the metadata, if you will, the understanding of what's inside the data, and the analysis aims to draw conclusions based on that evidence. And then we got the reporting part, which is the ability to handle this and build up a timeline, if you will, almost on a storyboard, understanding the series of events, the collaboration, and then the tracking of that in order to draw conclusions, essentially. And then the last part is the ability to handle the archiving, the long-term preservation of that evidence that is so essential for maintaining the data integrity. It's also vital to guarantee the usability of that evidence over time, making sure that what you save it in is eventually retrievable and that you will understand what you're retrieving in 5 or 10 years or 20 years time, depending on the case and the laws prevailing. So these are some of the big challenges in that process. And that is handled within the case management, various tools that are provided in case management. So while the workflow is clearly defined, the infrastructure that maintains that workflow is often neglected or undefined. Sometimes it's very siloed, where you have individual departments, individual teams working on their own infrastructure, but it creates difficulties to get that end-to-end efficiency and the ability to bind it together and actually process it at scale and at speed. So the lack of end-to-end infrastructure is shall we say, the workflow that has been fully lab validated and correctly sized for the desired outcomes is the cause for significant frustration. And users suffer from the time it takes to ingest, to analyze, and to output the data. So we will look a little deeper into some of the challenges and some of the difficulties facing the investigators and forensics experts in this workflow. So as the list of digital sources grows, the phones, the computers, the tablets, CCTV, real-time sensors, wearables, body-worn devices, body-worn watches, cameras, etc., etc., so does the amount of law enforcement investigation teams challenges, right? So this makes it difficult to reconstruct the evidence. It means that there's no longer a single point of truth for a case. You might have different recordings, different points of view, and different qualities of those as well. According to some of the main players on this market, we're looking at reports that are telling us over 96% of the investigators are seeing smartphones appearing in their investigations. Windows computers, over 50% of the cases. Tablets, almost 40% of the cases. And growing resource are looking at wearables, cryptocurrencies, and also those kind of devices are proving very, very different and difficult to address. And then you got the problem with siloed systems, right? So the digital evidence from those different devices often needs to be compared, contrasted, and investigated alongside other data sources, such as the cloud or data from internal police databases and so on. So you end up trying to tie together information and understanding from different silos. And because of those silos, different departments are handling those different rules and probably also, of course, different IT systems. So it takes a lot longer than it should to surface those understandings, to get that insight and to get that data and understanding out of it. So that also means that many law enforcement agencies are still lacking sufficient IT expertise to implement and kind of standardize on new digital technologies to speed up this process of collecting, analyzing, storing, and managing, and most importantly, perhaps sharing that digital evidence internally. So also with the passage of time, the legacy data becomes a problem. It becomes a problem from multitude of reasons. As you see, well, if we just think back at the eternal problem with IT is if someone gives you a floppy drive these days, most of us will laugh and say, well, you know, I can't do anything with it. I don't have a floppy drive anymore. And the same thing goes for a CD-ROM, and the same goes for many of the physical devices that are no longer as prevalent in the market as they used to be. And keeping that legacy, not just from a physical perspective, but also from a format perspective. If I give you something in a format that has long been in disuse, it becomes trickier and trickier to find the software that is compatible and that is capable to handle. So those are definitely the challenges, and as a result, legacy devices become a problem and a real challenge to the field of forensics. Oops, sorry. So that's some of the difficulties and some of the challenges. Now, if we look at how we need to address this, what we do is we're looking at the complexity, how this is often a manual process. It's time consuming. It takes several days or weeks or months, depending on the case, to provide the data and reports to investigators so that they can incorporate the findings into their investigations. So often significant amounts of data is missing from the device examinations, which in turn has implications in solving cases effectively and efficiently. So once investigators have the data and the reports from the lab, the investigation process does not necessarily get easier from that point. In fact, it can actually get more complicated. And the challenge of the data ingestion itself is one of the key frustration for a lot of forensics experts that we deal with. It's the time to evidence, right? It's the process of getting, as I mentioned, digital evidence stored on DVDs or flash drives and other removable media, which makes it difficult to track, trace, to ensure that audit trail is kept, and also very difficult to share securely. The amount of time evidence and investigative data ends up on public websites on YouTube and others is unfortunately much higher than it should be, and has serious and dire consequences for police forces and for anyone in the security industry, as it is a challenge to keep it under lock and key as it should be in that kind of process. So there's also a challenge with the limitation of the ability to process data, right? So it's a very resource-heavy task that often takes the patience from the investigators for moving forward. Okay, so this in turn leads to delays. It leads to delays in collaboration, and ultimately it leads to delays in how long it takes to solve and bring a case to completion. So the chain of custody is the chronological documentation of the evidence, and it's critical for the case to be admissible in court, right? So the chain of custody is crucial. The compliance of that chain of custody equally crucial, and it changes a lot between the countries. There are very different rules, and where I'm sitting here in the UK, for example, with other European countries, and further afield as well, for that matter. So the chain of custody should be recorded with full audit logs as often as possible, i.e. in as many markets as we work in, and logs showing who has access to that piece of evidence and any operations that have been performed. Those are some of the basics, right? Also the understanding and the governance of the data retention is to ensure the proper governance and compliance in accordance with the laws, the regulations of given jurisdiction. Also the historical evidence ingested to the system must remain compliant. So that's another challenge. In some places, the changes of the laws also does affect what has been recorded. And that opens up a can of worms in how you manage what has already been recorded and perhaps even archived sometimes. How do you make sure it is still compliant with the current law? Also, the security policies, when we look at the evidences scattered among a lot of different physical or virtual locations, the individuals now must store online many aspects of their lives, primarily through social networks and social media sites. And unfortunately, collecting information to reconstruct and locate and attack can severely violate users' privacy. And it's linked to other hurdles when cloud computing is involved. Different legislations, different legal aspects, and different challenges in how to address and handle that. So what do we do? Well, Dell Technology has a few ways of addressing this, and I want to bring your attention to some of them. We're going to stay far away from any product marketing or anything else in this particular talk, but I want to show you some of the abilities and understanding from Dell Technologies to provide that world-class enterprise infrastructure. So our range of essential IT offerings that include client devices, servers, storage, software-defined open networking, industry tools for video management, virtualization, and analytics, and so on. Now, what we're talking about and what I mentioned before is the need for a curated data platform, right? The ability to handle multiple specialized workloads. So one that integrates forensics investigative tools, incident response, and e-discovery technologies, and also have the ability to offer a single secure backend database and archive and video storage that gives the ability to address any type of digital investigation. Well, that's tricky because historically you've been looking at a lot of the, shall we say, the closed systems, the appliance approach, where you have one tool for one thing to handle, or potentially one server, one computer, one workstation for a team that is working on something. But once you start looking at it from a platform perspective, from a scalable infrastructure perspective, that's where Dell has the ability to provide a custom design solution. So we normally look at virtualization and hyper-converged. We have converged the storage platform. We purpose-build systems for digital forensics workflows. We access the required system building blocks for a distributed perspective. So we have the capability to look at it also from a distributed deployment all the way down to a centralized location, i.e. an on-premises, and a private or hybrid cloud approach to it as well. And that solves a lot of the problems with the governance of that data, the ownership of that data as well. So there's a few topics on automation that I want to touch on, and its ability to help speed up and simplify those implementations. The arrival of AI, the capability to automate a lot of data extraction from video and images and other non-structured data is really game-changing. So what we are working quite a lot with is combining some of our products. You might be familiar with VxRail or VMware, and combining those into, shall we say, pre-engineered and ready-to-run platforms, help eliminate the silos and speed up, shall we say, the operation and the alignment between the different teams, but still having the ability to separate and to, shall we say, keep those separate from a data perspective and data access perspective when and as needed. Also, Dell has the capability to offer a technology as a service, so that would be our Apex offering. And we also have something called the ability to help mitigate and take care of encryption and the usual cybersecurity risks through our open networking community. Our industry-leading hardware and partner offerings help address network complexities. So I'll stop there, but those are some of the, shall we say, some of the talking points that I'd be happy to follow up on if you do have more and additional questions around there. The key is really to have the ability to handle this with working together with a robust partner ecosystem. Great part of the challenge and then the, shall we say, the effort goes into having lab validation tests. And the lab validation test goes into things like understanding the workflow within a certain tool on the market. So commercial tools that are there for extracting data from from cell phones, for analyzing video, for checking CCTV events, and so on and so forth. The ability to validate and test that in a lab environment and provide not just a product, a server or workstation that can help with this, but understanding how that end-to-end workflow behaves, and then matching that with a infrastructure that is matching is part of the value that we get out of that. And that kind of gives us the ability to provide an end-to-end solution portfolio. So again, speeding up, making sure that the software and the hardware are aligned, making sure that the software capabilities can be scaled up, that they can be scaled out, and taking away that need for the, shall we say, the deep IT expertise that is so often plaguing a lot of the forensics and law enforcement people that are working, trying to stay away from being IT experts and trying to be forensics and law enforcement experts. So, well, what do we do? Well, we deploy this in hundreds of law enforcement installations all across Europe and EMEA and the world. They're very seldom identical to each other, but they always share that view behind it on trying to make it a scalable and long-term proposition, if you will, to extract the value of those systems over a long period of time. So we focus a lot on making it modular, meaning that you can deploy it and you can expand it and scale it up and scale it out over time as well. So have a quick look. I just want to summarize some of the workflow and the outcomes that we handle and that we look at. We look at the ability to create data platforms to do indexing and tagging. And what we get out of that is the possibility for investigators to extract the meaning from that raw data that has been recorded, that has been ingested. The part of the process is the discovery and analysis, where we have the capability to process that, link between the shall we say, the evidence and automate that in artificial intelligence and machine learning models. And that helps increase the speed and the capability, gives you output and searchable output that really speeds up the process. And lastly, the sharing and reporting. So the collection of this makes it possible to not just automate the data and link the evidence, but that also makes it available within a platform, within the whole system, if you choose to. And that in terms builds up for better collaboration and quicker resolution of the case. So the next steps on your journey, well, what do we recommend? Please get in touch with us. I'm going to leave the details here. You're free to use those QR codes. And if there's anything in this presentation that piqued your interest, we will be more than happy to have a deeper chat with you and go through some of the capabilities from a technology point, from a workflow point of view. And yeah, here to help and assist. So I'll leave hopefully a couple of minutes for any questions. And we'll take it from there. Thank you. See if there's any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Erik. Thank you for this useful and inspiring presentation. I have one question for you. How do we deal with the challenges related to frequently changing phone technologies, particularly in terms of their complexity and the methods of collecting data from them?
Well, so as we've probably all seen on the news in the last few months, and as technologies get more and more complex, they require more and more capable tools. Now, from a Dell Technologist standpoint, we work quite closely with some of those tool providers, and as I mentioned, we put a lot of this through the labs and the validation labs in order to understand what those tools require in turn to be able to sometimes, shall we say, decrypt, to disseminate the information that is available on those devices, and being able to scale up those systems accordingly and in the right way is half of the challenge. And that's the part that we're looking at from our perspective. So working quite closely with the ecosystem, building up the platforms that can handle it, not just from the individual devices, but also the combination of hundreds, sometimes thousands of devices that needs comparing and contrasting between. I hope that answers.
Thank you, Erik. Thank you once more.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Also mine.